It's derived from the basic human right of free action, free trade, consensual arrangements, and so forth. Okay? It's negative in the sense that it refers to basically leaving each other alone except through consensual agreement. It's the way we act with each other, and it's essentially social. There is no point to talk about rights by an individual on a desert island alone. Okay? Rights are essentially about the relationship we have with each other. The final thing I would say about a right is it's not utopian. That is, we should, each of us, be able to exercise our rights. They should not be difficult to exercise. Like any human event, there are probably some people that can't perform the action we're talking about, but for the most part, for most individuals, the kinds of rights we're talking about, you and I should be able to exercise without any difficulty. That is to say, it's not really difficult for me not to criminalize you, okay? That for me not to violate your rights really is not that much of a challenge. Okay, so now we come to, what's the relationship between rights and human action, in a way. So what I'm trying to say here, rights is kind of like the institutional hub. We have this sort of structure or framework, and then within that structure or framework, human activity takes place. And human activity, I'm arguing, is essentially dynamic. If it's not dynamic, it's because somebody is actually making it not dynamic. But if you leave people free to act on your own, what you'll find is a lot of diversity, a lot of change, a lot of activity, a lot of differences. Okay? So what sort of structure is that going to take place in? Well, rights is the structure. Human activity occurs within that framework. That's what rights are supposed to do, is provide that framework in which human activity can take place. I would argue, and this is perhaps a point of contention, but human goods are not generic, but they're individualized, which is to say that something isn't good in the end unless it applies to you, and it may apply to you in a different way than it applies to me. We can talk about things in general, okay? The philosopher Aristotle mentioned a number of things, for example, that he thought attached to human beings to live a good life. These included friendship, these included health, these included pleasure, these included intellectual pursuits, and so forth, okay? But these generic goods, and we can talk about them, and I could say, and in fact I would agree with Aristotle, I could say to you, you need these goods in order to live a human life, okay? But in what proportion do you need them? Okay, this is where the good becomes individualized. It's one thing to say that you need friends, or all human beings to live a good life should have friends. It's another thing to say, well, how many and who they are. Okay? It's one thing to say that you need health. It's another thing to say how many times a week do you go to the gym and work out. Okay? Obviously, looking at Tom, he works out a lot and looks good. Obviously, looking at me, you know that I don't go to the gym too often. Right? So we have a difference in the way we've sort of structured our lives. The good is something that is differentiated, individualized between us. Again, ethicists like to talk in general, universal terms, and that's fine, but as I'm saying, in the end, it has to be individualized. And I think this connects up with Tom's talk about what personal identity might mean and how that might function in culture for you as well. We can come back to that later. Now, key point here is that rights don't make people good. Okay? Respecting your rights is one thing. That's not all it means to be a good person. Okay? It may be that I don't do anything. I don't violate my mother's rights. But if I never call her, that doesn't mean I'm treating her well, right? It's one thing to respect somebody's rights. It's another thing within that framework that I'm talking about to act well as a human being. Those are two different sorts of problems, okay? The liberal issue is, what are rights and how do we respect them? That's still a long way from answering the question, what does it mean to live a good human life? Okay? What I'm suggesting to you is, what does it mean to live a good human life is the moral question in one way. Rights are a moral concept, don't get me wrong, but primarily, if you had the right structure completely in place, you still have a lot of questions about what it means to live a good life as a human being. And that's what I'm trying to separate here. So, I put it that ethical principles that make actions possible, that's what rights do. They make it possible for you to live a human life, okay? But they aren't the same as the principles that might guide that life, okay? Once you have the possibility of living a good human life, you still have the question, well, what does that mean? What principles should I live by? What kind of person should I become? All those questions are not answered by respecting people's rights. Okay? Rights, what they do is they recognize the centrality of self-direction. What do I mean by this? Only that whatever life you choose, whatever kind of person you decide to become, whatever principles you decide to live by, you are deciding. Okay? What rights do is make that decision possible for you. Okay? They allow you to make that decision. I'm not telling you this is what it means for you to live a good life. Okay? You're making that decision. So rights protect the centrality of self-direction. Okay? That's their purpose. That's their function. Once they do that, it's still up to you what kind of person you want to become, how you want to live your life, and so forth, as I've been saying. But all of that, what kind of person should I become? How do I want to live my life? What does it mean for me to live a good life? All of that depends upon, first, that I have to be self-directed. If you're telling me how to live and you're not letting me live any other way than the way you tell me, whose life is it? Who is really the self-directed person there? It's not me, it's the person who's telling me to live that way, okay? So I have to somehow be involved in the process with my own choices. Okay? It may be as simple as mere acceptance, okay? I've been brought up this way, I accept this. This seems to me to be the right way to live. Or it could be a very complicated process of deep reflection and years of thinking about what you want to be. I'm including all that, but at some point, somewhere, you have to be involved in the process. If you aren't involved in the process at all, we're not talking about self-direction. We're talking about being directed by somebody else, okay? The function of rights is to protect that self-direction. Okay? If I'm right about that, then the market order, as we're defining it, that is this serious protection of negative rights, is in fact not dehumanizing, as it's been accused. It's quite the opposite. It's a very humanizing institution. It's basically saying what is really central about human beings is choice and self-direction. What the market does by protecting the possibility for self-direction is recognizing your humanity. That seems to me to be exactly the opposite of what it means to dehumanize. In fact, in my view of things, it is actually a humanizing institution. Now, what it doesn't do is make your choices easy, right? You can have that right of self-direction